finally be somewhere offline, not only in front of camera. Um, I wanted to share with you a few thoughts about organizational culture and how it can support growth. A lot of people, when they are thinking about growth, are in fact only considering scaling the sales. And although it's very important to do that, this is not where the biggest challenge of scaling a company comes. And one of the things that makes it a startup is that it grows really, really fast. So before can we turn the timer on? Can we turn the timer on?
Timer on.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Awesome, thanks. So before we jump into organizational culture, I just wanted to share with you how I see what a startup is. Because these days, everyone is posing to be a startup. Everyone wants to do a startup. Every single company we hear is a startup. Every website, every simple tool that comes online is a startup. And I don't really agree with that. I think that we need to go to the basics and ask ourselves what a startup is. And I see that there are three crucial factors to name some venture a startup. First, it's lack of access to traditional funding. So if you're spinning off a product out of an enterprise and you're aiming for exponential growth, it's not a startup. You have the budget behind you. If you want to hire 10 more people, you just go to the recruitment agency, you place an order, and you have 10 more people. You don't need to struggle with financial rounds. You don't need to balance on the verge of profitability to cover from the revenues. And shortly after you meet the certain KPIs, you can be funded again from the internal budget. So it's not only about building a scalable product, it's also about not being able to take a loan, not being able to fund the whole thing from the concept to the moment when you can scale it from your own pocket. And the second aspect is operating under high uncertainty. The fact that I cannot afford building a huge office space is not only not a startup because I don't have enough money. It's not a startup because it's not highly uncertainable business. It's been done for years and years. There are standards around it. There are special funding lines in banks. There are ready structures to actually build an office building and rent it and sell it as an investment to the funds that are acquiring such buildings. So it's not highly uncertainable, like a factory of cans that, by the way, can be a much better business than doing a startup. And the third factor that's very important, even if you're doing something very unique and basing it on your own research and maybe it's a part of your PhD and you feel that you really found something and you don't have the access to the grant, you don't have a lot of own money, so you feel like you're a startup, but the question is, can you grow exponentially? And that exponential factor is something that I really wanted you to take a few minutes to think about. What is an exponential factor? One of exponential factors is the pace. It took 64 years for airlines to have 50 million passengers. But for Facebook, it only took 4 years to get to 50 million users. And Pokemon Go, a game that was quite popular a few years ago, it took only 19 days. This is how exponential factor works. It can instantly grow the number of users around the world just day after day, month after month, adding up to incredible numbers. And we can see exponential scale. No matter how strong you are and how many hours you do the CrossFit, you will never get as many books in the hand as someone that has Kindle, because it's a completely redefining of the way we're reading. And the plus side is I can take 200 books on my holidays, and that's not a problem for me. I would never do that with the original concept of the book. And there's also exponential impact. When I don't really believe that Facebook has ruined democracy. I think that it put an exponential factor on the impact that mechanisms that were already there are working. We had fake news forever, but the impact of a London Conspiracy Daily that says that vaccines are bad and Brexit is good is probably next to nothing. But when you get a very personalized message that uses people you trust to strengthen the way of convincing you, this is something that traditional media cannot fight with. And these are the examples of exponential factor that's in the center of growth and the center of scalability. I want to be Captain Obvious for a minute and give a thought to what is needed for business success. There's a good message here, good news. It's simple. You only need 3 things. It's capital, talent, and market. You got those 3, you can be successful in whatever you want in your any venture. And today I want to focus on talent because growing a company, the complexity of the role of the founder, the complexity of the way you communicate, the complexity of the way you deliver your work, it doesn't grow with the scale of your revenues. You can 10-fold your revenues from e-commerce, and you will probably need to hire 1 or 2 more people. But if you want to 10-fold the revenues of a service company, you need to 10-fold the number of people that are working there. And that's why startups that are growing really fast can learn a lot from companies that are suddenly hiring a lot of people. And this is something that I really find important when it comes to organizational growth. Oh, how can I go back? Okay. When it comes to organizational growth. And I'm going to use a word that scares the shit out of any founder. It's process. You say that word and you're instantly hated in any startup community because processes are somehow attached to the thought that it's boring, that it's intruding, that it's less intuitive, that it makes you put a ticket to get an update on the software that you really, really need. But I believe that processes are the result of your organizational culture. And what that organizational culture is and why is it so important to consider is because this is the source of the competitive advantage that stays with us for the longest. So when you start, you have the idea, and this is your competitive advantage. You have some approach. You have some new way of doing things that you think you will improve the market with. And this is what you have. And this is what you work on. This is the best thing that you can offer to market, and a new way of doing things. And then you work on your product. You put that thought into something that people can pay for and use, and that becomes your competitive advantage. There you need to find it. But when you look further, we always say that business is worth as much as your team. But the fact is that if you're growing for years, if you have a business that sustains for years, the team changes. People come and go. And when you will hire 2 times as many people as you already have in your company over a year, everything changes. So the team itself cannot be the longest source of your competitive advantage. You can have your brand, you can have your market position. I think that, for Coca-Cola, being Coca-Cola is one of the competitive advantages these days. But what actually makes a company sustainable for a very long time and over the edge with competition is organizational culture. Organizational culture is not what we are associating it with. So usually a hipster office, a gaming room, and free lunches. This is not what organizational culture is about. What organizational culture is about, in the end, is answering three simple questions. Who should we hire? Who should we promote? And who should we fire? Organizational culture is something that is a north star of your decisions. It's easy to make a good or bad decision, but most of the decisions that we make as entrepreneurs is good or good and bad or bad. And it's not always obvious which to choose. So we need a north star. We need something that will help us assess the situation. And organizational culture is what gives us a tool for that. So what it really is, what do we need from organizational culture for it to support growth? First, we need it to be scalable, because what works when there are 5 people on board and what works where there are 20 or 50 or 100 people on board is a completely different thing. I remember one time where I went to the office and virtually no one was there. We were a company of maybe 10 people, and 5 of senior employees were on holidays at the same day. And we had some, fire, and we had to do some stuff, but it was impossible because no one was there. And it happened because at that time, we were mostly smoking, so the way that we were organizing our holidays was on a smoke when someone shared that bought cheap tickets to wherever. And believe me that continuing, it works great when there's 3 or 5 of you, but when there's 20 or 30, it can really be a source of big trouble. So first of all, we need scalability, and that's why I brought up the devil of the process. The second thing we need is openness, because the changes will come so fast and we really need to embrace it. As I said, what works with 5 doesn't work with 50. If you're going from 5 to 50 in 2 years, everything will change. Some people will not fit, some other people will be needed, and will be transforming the organization from inside. And the third thing is that what every culture needs is authenticity. If you're not authentic with your culture, this is something that will never resonate and that will hurt your business much more than not managing your culture at all. Because culture is always there. Culture is the way we're doing things. Culture is the way that we address each other. Culture is what we expect of each other. Culture is how we handle the meetings. Culture is how we handle promotions, how we handle pay raises, how we handle onboarding of our employees. So it works across the organization to give a certain experience to both your customers and your employees. And when you're building a venture, it's sometimes compared to preparing a bus to ride. A lot of people say that the most important thing is to set a goal of that ride. So to say, where are we actually going? And that might be the case when you're doing something very predictable. You know that people want to go from Warsaw to Gdańsk, so you're establishing a line there. But if you're going for something new, if you're going to find the routes that haven't been ridden yet, it's much smarter to start by assembling the right team and then together with them choosing where do we want to go. And I found a really nice way of choosing where do we want to go after I have assembled my dream team. And what I found really useful is a concept by the author of Good to Great, Jim Collins, which is the hedgehog concept. The hedgehog concept tells us what is the dream future of our company? What is the dream future of our organization? And it needs 3 factors to be a very good goal. So firstly, you need something that you are passionate about. You really need to like what you're doing. If you want to get deep, you need to get deep into something. You have to be interested. It's impossible to do a startup. It's impossible to make a fast-growing company when your approach to work is like in Żabka, you know, beep, 7-Eleven, beep, card or cash, beep. This is not a way of doing a company. You need passion. And the second thing is, it's a big statement, but what you can be the best in the world at. And that is something that a lot of companies are lacking. If you ask founders, what are your market differentiators? They say quality, innovation, and customer experience. Every single one of them, the same things. So what can you actually be exceptional at? Where can you deliver the value like no one else can? And then, third part, what drives your economic growth? Are you a business of selling hours of developers? Are you a business of selling projects? Are you in the business of selling the access to the application? Are you in the business of solving a certain problem? And what people are actually wanting to pay for, how to attach value to your price. And the culture that we've built at Neoteric that supports it is the culture that has 2 pillars, freedom and responsibility. And I believe that in the balance between of those 2 is a culture that really embraces the change, that's open to new cultures, that's open to new kind of people, new way of thinking, that lets brilliant minds collide together under one goal. Because when you delegate responsibility, and at some point you cannot just delegate tasks, because delegating tasks is something that requires a lot of attention. You need to actually know what to do, how to do it, to properly delegate. And at some point, you don't want to delegate the task. You want to delegate the responsibility. But when you do that, you need to give your team the freedom to work on that responsibility on their own. And that's something that triggers a lot of challenges with micromanagement, with letting go of the things that you were really, really good at, but you need to start doing something else. And the basis of such culture is trust, is knowing that you have your back, is knowing that your team can actually make a mistake, they can not deliver on a goal, they cannot deliver on a task, they can fail on something, but the way you've organized the company around them is that the consequences of their choice are not ruining the whole thing, because you don't put more responsibility than someone can take. So that's more or less from my side. I encourage you to start working on your organizational culture consciously. The best advice I ever got on that is to go and speak to your team. Organizational culture is always there, and sometimes it's better to find it than to start designing it from scratch and trying to push yourself into something that you're not. It's also a journey. It changes with every significant hire. So you need to keep your pulse, and you need to find a way of growing what's important for your culture and eliminating what's distracting from it. Thanks a lot, and I wish you a good conference, both here and online. See you later.